want to talk about the seasons of change in recovery. And I was thinking today about how so much is temporary, um, not just in recovery, the the things that I deal with that I think it's never going to end, like my headache. It's never going to end. Um, but everything is temporary. Everything. So it will end. If it ends with me, then so be it. But it will end. Um, I think about the phases of grief that I have been going through. Um, in the past 10 months, and how I've been angry. It's amazing to think back and think how I actually was angry. Um, because who did I have to be angry at? Well, that I think comes to the surface in a lot of different ways for a lot of different people, depending on what you're dealing with. Um, I've heard a lot in sobriety how folks will be angry with God. Um, Folks will be angry with God for the loss of someone close to them. I've heard it over and over again in sobriety. And frequently, what I've heard along with that is as they were drinking themselves to death, as they were drinking to try to relieve the pain, um, they had this wall that they had put up between them and God. Because why would God do this to me? Why would God take this person away from me? And I was reminded of this today. I had a wonderful conversation with a friend today, and we were talking about the same thing. And anyway, I started thinking about the temporariness. That's not a word. The temporary aspect, there we go, of grief and anger and sadness and fear and all of these feelings, jealousy, these feelings that I was talking a lot about feelings in the early podcast episodes, and I was talking about the relationship between feelings. And I was talking about when one feeling causes another feeling, and it gets so complex to figure out what is it that I'm feeling. But all of it is temporary. And so this reminds me of the seasons. And we're right at the beginning of this season where my garden is looking beautiful right now. I have all of these. I'm a big gardener, and I haven't always been, but this is kind of a new thing. I started being a gardener, um, I don't know, over the past 10 years, I would say. I've really started to have a love for it. And in the beginning of, like in the spring, it is so cool to look. I have just this little square garden, and it is so cool to see every day little tiny little buds coming out, little green little flowers start to open. And some of this stuff in this little garden, you would think it's little and I would know what it is, but some of the stuff I plant like at the end of the year, or I plant it somewhere in the middle of the summer and I kind of forget that I put it there. So that's what is happening right now. I'm having these plants that are just breaking through the soil and I'm like, "Oh, I think that's and I'm not great at naming plants, but it's just cool. It's just cool. And I'm really enjoying this new season that's coming. And I think that might be another reason why I've been feeling a little more positive. Just one of the reasons. And it reminds me of really, I can compare it to the blossoming feeling that I'm getting going to vestibular therapy. And I also can compare it to the different phases of my sobriety and healing. So I was thinking about spring, summer, autumn, and winter. I shouldn't say autumn because she's in her crate right now trying to sleep. So we're going to say fall. So spring, summer, fall, and winter. And comparing these to recovery, either stroke recovery or sobriety. So we're just going to see what happens with this comparison. So we'll start with spring. Spring is, of course, the season of new beginnings. And this is something that's really cool. I'm not going to go into anything about the Persian New Year because I hardly know anything. But as you know, my last name is now Abbasi. And I've been learning over the years about the Persian New Year, and it's on the first day of spring, and all of these things that they put out on the table, the fish and the grass and all of this stuff is just cool to learn about. It's really inspiring for me to hear about. It really represents this season of new beginnings, and I love that. So I love celebrating that with my husband. And for many of us in recovery, we do come across, if we show up, if we keep coming back, whether it's sobriety, stroke recovery, there is this point of you get a little tiny initial burst of hope. And it is a sense of renewal after this darkness that you've been in, which of course would be the hard, cold winters, which I'll get to winter. But that would be that time where alcoholism just dominated our lives. So spring reminds me of this time where, when I was going to sobriety meetings in the beginning, there were little seeds of hope that were planted in me. I was still drinking, so there's only so much I was able to be aware that they were being planted in me. But just by showing up, and that's why they say keep coming back, because just by showing up and sitting in a room of people just like me who have similar thoughts and maybe not the same experiences, but we all have the same disease. We all have the same problem, if you will. And as I sit and I listen, I don't even have to speak. There are seeds that are being planted in me. And that for me is spring. So this also I have found to be very true in stroke support groups, vestibular support groups, um, going to my psychiatrist. These these seeds are planted if I am willing to show up. If I do the next right thing, then a seed will be planted. It's a time to to see potential. It's a time where there's not much we have to do. We just have to be. We just have to show up. And although there's not much you have to do, you're very fragile at this time. Those seeds are very fragile at this time. So if we move on to summer, this is where we really start doing the work in our recovery programs. Again, if it's in sobriety, we start working the steps. We start calling our sponsor. We start really, when we're in the meetings, start going, me too. Oh, that happened to me. And you hear your own story coming out of somebody else's mouth. There's nothing like it. For me, there's no psychiatrist, therapy, or anything that if somebody hasn't experienced what I'm experiencing, that will compare to being in a room full of people that have experienced the same thing as me. And yet, it might not be the same story, but it rhymes. I hear that a lot in sobriety. It rhymes. So this is where recovery starts to feel a little brighter. We see a little more light and feel a bit more alive. We start to feel just a little bit stronger. Whether that strength is, I didn't cry today, or I didn't cry when I went to the store today. It's the little things. And we become more stable, and we start to see tiny itty bitty little benefits for our hard work. It's not necessarily when things are easy. It's still hot in the summertime. But we see the beauty that is coming out of our hard work. Our relationships improve in sobriety, hopefully. And our self-esteem, our relationship with ourself improves, our self-esteem. So moving on to fall, this is a time to harvest. So that is gaining the real rewards of our efforts. This is a time where we are reflective and we are filled with gratitude. It's when we look back and look at how far we've come, and perhaps when we begin to start helping others, when we start having enough that we've harvested that we have enough to share with others. I can't stress the importance enough of gratitude. I think that when I think of fall, if you look at all the decorations, I'm a big house decorator, or I was. I don't do it as much as I used to, but I used to have like every season had bins and bins and bins of decorations. And when you break out the fall decorations, all of them say gratitude. I'm thankful for all of that stuff. And I think that it's just a really good reminder to have it around the house. So, fall is really acknowledging our accomplishments and sharing that bounty of our resilience with others. Sharing all of that stuff that we've learned in sobriety and stroke recovery, whatever it is that you're recovering from or dealing with. Once we have gotten to a place where we can actually harvest, when we get to a place where when we hear other people's stories and we can see how they're impacting other newcomers in the room, that's when we know that we have enough to give. When we start being able to look at the next suffering alcoholic or the next stroke survivor and thinking, how can I be of service? Now I've had so much freely given to me, how can I give back? And that's one of the reasons why I do this podcast, because I wouldn't be here today if I wasn't given all of this stuff so freely. All I had to do was show up in the spring. And then there's winter. And winter is that tough time. It's a time of introspection, and often it's a time of isolation because it's so freaking cold outside. Growth seems to stall. Challenges that we once faced may resurface. But it is this season that it's critical to see the temporary nature of seasons. All of them, really. It's also important when we're harvesting in the fall to know that things aren't always going to be this way. And it doesn't mean don't ever be happy. It means I got to still do the work in the fall because I have to prepare for winter. I have to make sure that I have what I need saved up because I'm going to need a lot more of it in the winter time. So we're doing the work in every season. But that winter time is a critical period for doing that inner work. It's a time when we may feel like we can't remember the tools that we've been given. The pain may be so intense that you just can't see all that you have been practicing throughout the year. Winter is when we need to pick up the phone because it's cold and we can't always get to people. We have to pick up the phone. And it's the same when we're struggling with our diseases, our chronic illnesses, our sobriety, thinking about a drink. It's when things get really, really hard that you have to pick up the phone. And it's the time when you least want to pick up the phone. And that's when you have to turn your wanter off. This is what I do. So, embracing these seasons requires an understanding that they're all temporary. Because just as winter eventually gives way to spring, the most difficult challenges in our lives are not permanent. So they feel permanent. You know, I'm always going to be an alcoholic. I'm always going to have a broken brain. But it's what I do with it that's not permanent. What can I do with what I've been given? I've chosen to share my experience, strength, and hope with other people. That's what I've chosen to do with it. And it's what you choose to do with it that makes it grow, makes it get darker, makes it get lighter. The steps that you take along the way are going to give you valuable insight into yourself. And these transitions that we deal with in life are inevitable. It's that the steps that you take in the transition where we learn the most about who we really, really are. And sometimes we don't want to know who we are. I don't want to have to go through this to know more about myself. I just don't want to go through it. But what's my choice? What's my choice? The only choice I have is to keep moving forward. I was at a point 8 years ago where I didn't want to move forward anymore. I truly was done. And I made a decision at some point in that phase of my life that I'm not going to ever do this. I'm not going to ever stop moving forward. There's nothing that's going to stop me, ever. And so I got sober. And I relapsed. And then I got sober again. And that time it stuck. And, but that was because I did the work. I just kept, I don't know, I've talked about that. Sometimes I don't know. It's a miracle. That's all I can call it. It's a miracle. And from that miracle, I have learned how to navigate the really hard stuff that comes in my life. And I may not do it gracefully. I think that a lot of times I portray some grace, but it gets really ugly. And I show that sometimes on here. You know, I have cried. I've cried on here. I've actually sobbed a couple times. Um, but that's what it takes for me to get to the point of acceptance and willingness sometimes. So, this cyclical nature of recovery continues to teach me some patience, and it helps me to try to maintain hope. I can't tell you honestly that I have had hope every day. The lifetime listeners here know that I used to have little stars that I would put on my mirror every day that I felt hope. And that was important to me because I was afraid I wasn't feeling any hope. Um, I felt like I was in a full on, long time, long cold winter. That's what I felt like. And I had to somehow make it a tangible thing that, oh, I felt hope. I need to look at that. I need to see something that represents the hope that I had that day. So I put a sticker on my mirror that represented that I had hope that day. And then I guess a couple days later, I put another sticker. Oh, there was hope. I had another sticker. I have since stopped doing the stickers because what I thought was that they were decals and they were going to come off easily from my mirror, and they did not. So that was a nightmare to get off, but it did the trick. That's what I needed. I really needed. It's just like using the God box where I would write down things that I needed to let go because I didn't know how to let go, and I would write it in the God box and shut the box. I would write it on a sticky note and shut the box. So I'm pissed off at my boss, let's say. I'd write his name on a sticky note and I stick it inside this little wooden box. And that was a physical representation of what I was doing emotionally and mentally. And that's what the stickers were. They were a physical representation of what I was doing emotionally and mentally. I was gaining hope. And it was really effective for me. Excuse me. It was really effective for me. But I think I want to end on this. Every season that I have gone through in my recoveries has served a critical purpose. Even the strange anger that I had in the beginning, it served a purpose. It was necessary for me to feel it. And it didn't feel good. I didn't know why I was feeling it. And the fact that I was feeling anger made me frustrated because I didn't know why. I didn't want to feel it, and it certainly wasn't doing anything for my symptoms, my vestibular symptoms. And that was back when I didn't even know what this was that I'm dealing with in my head. So remember that. Remember that whatever it is that you're dealing with, whatever season you're in, it is serving a purpose in the whole scheme of things, in the whole picture. It's serving a purpose, and a new season will come. But you got to show up for it. You got to suit up and show up and just keep coming back. So thanks for joining me today on the Recovery Daily Podcast.